So today we will discuss the volume of extruded material is correlated with neurologic severity in small breed dogs with type 1 thoracolumbar intervertebral disc herniation. This is out of JAVMA from March 2023. Just going through the abstract, looking at the objective, it was to assess whether the volume of extruded disc material is correlated with neurologic severity in dogs with type 1 thoracolumbar intervertebral disc herniation. For the animals included, there were 70 client-owned small breed dogs with type 1 thoracolumbar intervertebral disc herniation diagnosed between July 2016 and June 2018. Looking at the procedures, for this retrospective cohort study, the medical records of 70 dogs with surgically confirmed type 1 thoracolumbar intervertebral disc were reviewed. The volume and height of the intervertebral disc and the area of the maximal transverse compressed spinal cord were measured using CT myelographic images. For each dog, the volume of disc immediately cranial to the herniated disc was an internal control. Dogs were grouped on the basis of grade of neurologic severity. Looking at the results, preoperative grades of neurologic severity were grade 2, or paraparetic but ambulatory in 7 dogs, grade 3, or non-ambulatory paraparesis in 16 dogs, grade 4, which were paraplegic dogs with deep pain sensation, there was 28, and then grade 5, which was dogs that were deep pain negative, and there were 19. The total volume of the affected intervertebral disc were significantly larger than the internal control. Weak positive correlation was found between the volume of extruded material into the vertebral canal and the grade of neurologic severity. Looking at the clinical relevance, based on their findings, it's indicated that the total volume of affected intervertebral disc is larger in dogs with type 1 thoracolumbar intervertebral disc herniation, and the volume of extruded material into the vertebral canal is weakly correlated with the neurologic severity. Going through the introduction, they give some background on intervertebral disc disease. Just as a reminder, with intervertebral disc disease, the D can be defined as disease, degeneration, or displacement. With displacement, you can have a disc herniation or a bulge, and then with herniation, there's two main types. There's the protrusion, which is type 2, and then the extrusion, which is type 1, with the latter being more common in chondrodystrophic breeds, where chondroid metaplasia occurs in the nucleus pulposus early on in life, leading to mineralization of the nucleus pulposus. Diagnosis is generally made off of MRI or CT, with radiographic myelogram also being an option, though typically frowned upon. Several studies have investigated the severity of neurological deficits to the degree of maximal spinal cord compression, showing no correlation between the clinical signs other than with disc-associated wobblers, which is a different disease altogether. The objective of the study was to assess the amount of disc herniated rather than maximal compression to see if it correlated with clinical signs, hypothesizing that it would. The setup of the study is adequate to try and answer the hypothesis. Something interesting that they did that I haven't seen before is comparing the amount of in situ disc present at the site of herniation to the disc cranial and caudal in addition to the herniated disc. Thus, in theory, they could see how much loss of volume there truly was. There are limitations to this, which I'll get into shortly, but still interesting nonetheless. Additionally, CT myelogram was performed on all dogs. Looking at the results, 20 dogs were excluded, the majority being excluded due to spinal cord swelling, resulting in the myelogram being difficult to interpret. In total, 70 dogs were included in the study, with 62 of them being miniature dachshunds. 7 dogs were ambulatory paraparetic, 16 were non-ambulatory paraparetic, 28 were paraplegic with deep pain sensation, and 19 were deep pain negative. I do wonder how many of the excluded dogs were deep pain negative that had loss of myelogram, which could skew the results in the outcome. The most common site of disc herniation was L12, followed by T13-1, which is somewhat consistent with other studies. For the outcome, 100% of the dogs that maintained motor had a successful outcome, 93% of the paraplegic dogs with deep pain had a successful outcome, and 73% of the deep pain negative dogs had a successful outcome. But again, this could be skewed a bit because of the exclusion criteria, especially since none of the dogs developed myelomalacia. So I still follow the mantra of saying 50-50 prognosis in deep pain negative dogs, and these results will not change that. The mean volume of extruded disc material was 87 millimeters cubed, which, if I'm converting that correctly, is roughly, rounding up, 0.1 milliliters. The in situ disc volume was less at the site of herniation compared to cranial or caudal, but the volume of herniated disc plus in situ disc at the site of herniation was larger when compared to the disc cranial or caudal. The amount of herniated disc was larger in paraplegic dogs compared to paraparetic dogs with an R value of 0.31, so again a slight positive correlation. And like other studies, the maximum compression ratio was not associated with neurologic grades, and they have a couple of figures that show these results. So the main takeaway from the study is that the volume of extruded material is at least partly responsible for the presenting neurological severity in dogs with acute disc herniation. Comments I have is, what if there was a previous disc herniation at the cranial or caudal site? How could this affect the volume of disc? It was never really discussed if this was a concern or not, or if this happened on any occasion. Something they do briefly discuss is that of the measured herniated disc, some of it could have been hemorrhage. The appearance of acute hemorrhage, which most of the dogs presenting in the study had acute signs, is similar to that of calcified material. Therefore, this is a great limitation of the study that needed more attention, and for me dramatically reduces the impact of the study. Finally, as they had follow-up on 62 dogs, I wonder why they didn't look at the volume of disc herniation with prognosis. For me, this would be more important than presenting clinical signs. Overall, there is useful information to take away from this study, but due to the limitations, it's not going to change anything about how I practice, other than I might measure the volume of adjacent disc just for my own curiosity. But those are my thoughts. Thank you.